Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hi, Rob Tawab la Atam Za'ach Yakam Yawam on Rachado, Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam Kaya. Hamalaka Tashamayim Kwara. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call Halayim La La Banawa Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. Bahasham Rocha Kodashwa Mashanala Zaquim Nawim. Wamala Akim Sharo, which is our praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists. Bahasham, in the name Yahweh Shai, delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. This is an article on the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, and it says finding evidence of Noah's Ark in a single Chinese word. All right, and when we look at each different language has a biblical origination or origin. All right, and pretty much that's what scholars term the word Edenics. All right, and Edenics pretty much goes into the study of words and how they go back to the scriptures. Because every word, every language goes back to the scriptures. And I was on a trip one time, and I found it a pretty heavy point that a so-called missionary, she pretty much said that when they want to make like any type sort of pidgin language or translate the scriptures, they ultimately had to go back to the scriptures to pretty much make words. And that goes for every different language, because every language has, again, a biblical derivation. All right. So nevertheless, let's read into this article. It says many consider it a myth. Among those who do not, numerous expeditions have been sent out to the mountains of Turkey to look for it. It says, yet direct physical evidence of Noah's Ark remains elusive. There have been several claims of potential discovery at several different sites, but these remain highly controversial. Excuse me. All right, it says perhaps that's unsurprising for any wooden object from around 4,500 years ago. It says, but the mountains of Turkey aren't the only place where evidence of Noah's colossal ark can be sought out. It says, indeed, it may be found in the tiniest of objects, such as a single Chinese word. It says, building an ark out of radicals. The character-based Chinese language goes back at least far as 1250 BCE, as recorded on bones and bronze artifacts. And eat the meat, spit out the bones. It says the squarish Chinese characters can become quite complex, made up of several radicals, simple individual words with individual meaning, packed together to create a new word or character. One such example in the Chinese word for ship or large boat. This word is made up of three parts. It says 8 person, boat, and ship. All right, in which we see that these have a biblical derivation, because when we go into the Hebrew word for cha, which is the 8th character, all right, starting from the top, where it says middle, the middle Hebrew, is the first character, ba is the second character, ga is the third character, all right, which is going to correspond where it says name gam, but the word that will go with this will be foot, all right. So it says ba ga da will be 4, ha wa za cha. All right, and that cha, all right, is right here. It looks just like when we see, all right, here, and here. All right, second from the bottom. All right, it looks just like the number 8. All right, if you pretty much made modifications to it, and just like this one too, this one looks like a number 8. If modifications was made to it. All right, but it looked just like that Moabite character. All right, so it says 8, and then it says a person. All right, and it says literally mouth, because this looks like the Hebrew character pa. All right, this is a square, but when we go to pa in Bahalashwan Kwadash, all right, the pa looks like this right here. Give me a second right here. All right, that's pa. Second from the bottom, or excuse me, right at the bottom will be pa. All right, so pretty much we can see the resemblances, all right, in each language. But it says 8 persons, literally mouth, boat, and ship. All right, and what does this tell a story of? All right, so let's read down. And it says 8-person boat. It's a remarkable parallel to the biblical story of the great ark that housed 8 persons, Perhaps like me, your first thought is wondering if it's simply a result from the influence of missionaries or some such over the last several centuries. It's not. This word has been found dating to at least as early as 700 BCE. Then perhaps it's just coincidence that the ancient Chinese word for ship is a pastiche of words paralleling the story of the legendary ship Noah's Ark. If so, then the following Chinese story, traceable as far back as 3,000 years, has to likewise be coincidence. To summarize, once there was a colossal flood that was so great it covered the mountains, killing all mankind and land-dwelling animals, save for a heroic individual name that says Nuwa, but pretty much Noah's name goes into Nawach, which means comfort, or it means rest. All right, it goes into rest. Let me see. Noah's name right here, Nawach, rest. All right, resting place. Yeah, it goes into rest. Yep, Noah's name goes into to rest. So going back, it says who built an ark that housed 8 worshippers. When the flood water finally receded, the ark landed on a mountain and 8 individuals on board proceeded to repopulate the earth. All right, and we understand that as a paraphrased version of this scripture right here. All right, this is Genesis chapter 10 and verse 1, and it says, "Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Sham, Cham, Wayapath." All right, Sham goes into name, Cham goes into hot, Wayapath and Japheth goes into enlarged. All right, and Sham goes into a memorial, a name. All right, this is the lineage that the Lord Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai dealt with after Noah. All right, Cham. All right, this the Hamites. All right, so-called Africans. It says Yapath, Japheth. All right, that goes into those that essentially do it enlarged. All right, means to be. It goes into his land from so-called Europe over to Russia. All right, it says, and unto them were sons born after the flood. So pretty much they repopulated every pretty much repopulated the earth after the flood. All right, that's why it says unto them were sons born after the flood, because they pretty much repopulated everything. I'm gonna get this too. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, we'll get verse 16. All right, and it says, there is no end of all the people, even of all them that have been born. Excuse me. There is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. So every pretty much those that repopulated the earth, they're still, excuse me, they're still here today. All right. Ham is still here. Japheth is still here. All right. And the Lord has put his righteous lineage, all right, going from Sham, to Eber, Hebrew, all right, and so on and so forth. The righteous lineage. The Lord has always had a righteous lineage. It was just that in that time he had deal with Shem, all right, and in these times, it's the Israelites, all right. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Again, the Lord always deals with the righteous lineage. All right, but just going back to the point that it's no end of the people of in the scriptures. So let's also get this point. This is 2 Peter chapter 3. We'll get verse 20. All right, and it says, just going into this point, you see, because it mentioned it might be First Peter chapter 3. Excuse me. 1 Peter chapter 3, we'll get verse 20. All right, and it says, because we're going into that number 8, it mentioned, 8 people. All right, and then going back to this right here, it says ship equals boat, ship, 8. All right, and that looks like the Hebrew character cha or shamawana, which is 8. All right, and it says a mouth, which will be pa, and everybody has a mouth. Every person on the planet Earth has a mouth, but in Hebrew it will be pa. But it's just that Moab changed it into like this little square looking thing. All right, but let's get this real fast because every nation has a story of the flood. All right, so let's get this. This is 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 20, and it says, which sometime were disobedient when once the long suffering of the Most High waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. All right, so it's 8 souls. All right, you had Sham, Ham, Wayapath, Shem, Ham, Japheth. All right, Noah. All right, and then they had their wives, and then Noah had his wife. So it was 8 individuals. So it says the like figure whereunto even baptism doeth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward the Most High by the resurrection of Yahweh Shai HaMashiach. Let's get this in the NLT, and it says, and that water is a picture of baptism, which now saves you not by removing dirt from your body, but as a response to the Most High from a clean conscience. It is effective because of the resurrection of Yahweh Shai HaMashiach. So ultimately going into the the story of Noah's Ark. All right, because that was essentially a picture. It was a similitude. The Lord says he speaks in similitudes in Hosea chapter 12 and verse 10. So it was a similitude of true baptism, you see, because Noah was essentially baptized, all right, essentially in that water. All right. So let's continue on. It says, again, this is not a biblical accounting. This is an ancient Chinese account of a catastrophic event sometime in ancient history, one which can help explain the origin of the Chinese word for ship, as Ku Shin Vu, Rich Sheely, and Larry Hovey write in their research paper. But again, going back to, every nation has a story of the flood, like if I'm not mistaken, they had the book of like they had that, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, or one of them books over there that the heathen had, to where they had a story of the flood. It might have been like Hammurabi's Code or something like that, but one of them books had a story of the flood, and each nation, Sham, Ham, all right, Yapath, each of those that derive from those forefathers, they had some type of story of the flood. But it says the ancient book of documents, Shu Jing, written around 1000 BC, describes a gigantic flood so huge that it arose from heaven and drowned all the mountains and living things. All right, it says and let's get that account. Let's get Genesis chapter 8, and let me see. We'll go back to Genesis 7. Genesis 8, and let me see. All right, yeah. Genesis 8 and verse 1, it says, it says, and the Most High remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And the Most High made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. So pretty much the waters decreased. It says the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped. All right, so the fountains, the water, from below. All right, pretty much. It says the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped. Because at first, pretty much water was coming, from the earth, and then you had the waters coming from above the firmament. It says, and the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped. And the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. So we understand that the mountains are a lot shorter than what they was in the ancient world. But even today, mountaintops are very, very tall, so we can picture in the spirit how tall these mountains was, so if water was on those mountains, all right, it says, I'm gonna read it again. It says, and the waters decreased continually until the 10th month, and in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen, so at first it was covering the tops of the mountains. It says NLT, and 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to go down, other mountain peaks became visible. All right, so they was on mountain peaks. If the water was on top of mountain peaks. All right. Going back to this point right here, it says describes a gigantic flood so huge that it rose to heaven, pretty much going pretty much just saying that it went high. It says and drowned all the mountains and living things. So the mountaintops pretty much was covered. It says the original ancient Chinese texts were destroyed by various emperors over time when they felt threatened by them. Most notably, Emperor uh, Qin Shi Huang in 200 BC. Hence, most ancient Chinese history and legends are compilations of people's recollections by historians such as Confucius and Sima Queen, however you say that word. If the story of the flood recorded in Shu Jing is authentic, we reason that the analysis of ancient Chinese characters, which can be traced back to 2500 BC, ought to reveal such a story. All right. And right here, yeah, it says, skipping down, it says, such stories include Greek flood account dating to at least the first millennium BCE, a Babylonian tablet documenting the same, including the biblical parallel of animals entering the ark two by two, dating back to around BCE, Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh. Everybody has a story of the flood. Every nation has a story of the flood. Traceable in fragmentary tablets as far back as 2000 BCE, likewise paralleling the biblical account in many respects, right down to the release of a dove and raven at the end of the story, all right, in which they get it from the scriptures. All right, so let's get a couple more, you see, because every language has a biblical derivation. All right, let's get this. This is Barashi after Genesis chapter 11 and verse 1, and it says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. All right, now one language and one speech is the Hebrew. All right, when we see even in English, all right, you got words like rag. Rag goes back to rag. You know, rag goes into the head, God goes into the foot. You know, and you know when we break it down in the Hebrew, ultimately it tells a story. You know, and rag goes into something that's insignificant. All right, that's why when you pronounce it as rag, a rag is something that's not significant. You know, a cleaning cloth. A rag is a cleaning cloth. You know, something you can clean something with. All right, another word, dab. Dab means bear. All right, but in English, they changed dab into dab. All right, dab is the word for bear because a bear moves very slow in the forest when it's walking. You see, and it glides. You see, so when you say, oh, you know, dab this onto your skin, you're saying, okay, let me lightly glide this onto my skin so that pretty much it can, if you're talking about lotion, let me lightly dab this into my skin so that it pretty much can settle into the skin, you know. So that those show how, you know, pretty much every word has a biblical derivation. It's just that it's mispronounced, all right, because it should be dab instead of dab and rag instead of rag, all right. But reading it again, Genesis 11 and verse 1, it says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. All right, going into the Hebrew. All right, let's read down. It says, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. All right, so ultimately, it says, go to, let us go down, because the Lord ultimately dispatched the Alahayim, the judges, to ultimately confound the language of men. So it says, so the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babal, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. You know, so everybody went to their respective lands, Ham, Japheth, Sham, all right. All right, and ultimately everybody had their own language, and you know, they had their own customs and traditions and so on and so forth. All right, and which this happened during the time of Peleg. All right, and which, you know, Peleg goes into division. All right, so let's get that. This is Genesis chapter 10 and verse 25, and it says, and unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Palag, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Yakwatan. All right, Joktan. You know, so in Peleg's time, you know, the earth was divided into the different language groups, the different families, and, you know, so on and so forth. you know. But pretty much just going to the point that, the Hebrew, everything has a Hebrew derivation, and we got an example of that on that article. So let's also get this scripture. This is Isaiah chapter 19. And we'll give verse 18. It says, "In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan and swear to the Lord of hosts. One shall be called the city of destruction." All right. And that language is talking about the Hebrew. Ha'ai All right, the Hebrew, you know. And it says, "In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan." And when we look at the Canaanites, all right, in biblical history, all right, they're known as the Canaanites. In secular history, they're known as the so-called Phoenicians. All right. And when we go to, like, if we were to go to Google and type in Phoenician, it will show a picture of the Hebrew. All right. And that's because they spoke a derivative of the Hebrew, you know. And then also, the language of Canaan, our forefather Abraham ultimately was given the land of Canaan, and he spoke Hebrew. All right. Scriptures call him Abram the Hebrew. All right. So, nevertheless, let's get one more and that'll be it. But this is Tazapanya Zephaniah chapter 3, and we'll get verse 9. And it says, "For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent." All right, now it says, "For then will I turn to the people a pure language." All right, when we look at every language on the planet Earth, it is adulterated and it's mixed. All right. Everything goes back to the Hebrew. Everything has a Hebrew origin, and you can hear the Hebrew in every language you see. But the part that is adulterated and mixed is the pronunciation. All right. Hence, the Hebrew word dab, all right, and rag. All right. In English, those pronounced as rag and dab. All right. It's very whereas like in the best example I can give is, they have a specific language. They have a specific way they speak. That English is spoken in, like the UK English. All right. They would say, scholars would say that's the correct way to pronounce English. All right. Coming over here, they say, "Oh, well, it sound country," So when pronouncing it dab and rag, that's how we say it in English. All right. That would be a country way to say it. All right. In a so-called country way to say it in Hebrew. All right. Because the correct way would be dab and rag. All right. But just providing for an example, how to say it, or excuse me, providing forth an example as to, how it's adulterated. You see how the so-called vowels are supposed to be pronounced. All right. So reading it again, it says, Zephaniah 3:9, it says, "For then will I turn to the people a pure language." All right. That pure language goes back to the Hebrew. It doesn't have the E's, the O's, and the U's. All right. And then the characters are pronounced how they're supposed to be pronounced. All right. You got your ahs, your bahs, your gas, and so on and so forth. All right. It's pronounced as what they would call, or excuse me, it's pronounced, because it has a specific sound with it. All right. When we look at all the characters, you got, again, Abba, Gada, Ha, Wa, Za, Ha. All right. So, it's pretty much very enunciated. All right. That goes into how it's pure. All right. The only character that sounds different, all right, is going to be the I. All right. So it's a glottal sound. But it says that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. So that's the most important part of the language. All right, the Lord's name, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. All right, it said that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. All right, and that word for one consent goes into shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. All right, that's what that word one consent is, shakam. All right, which means the shoulder. All right, and again, the Lord's name, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, is the most important part of the language. We got the Lord's name. All right. And we got the basis of the language, in which, we'll get, the rest return in the kingdom, but just pretty much want to go into that point, you see, because every language has a biblical derivation in the words, and things of that nature, So, Adawarantaza Zabanaya Palos, that was a beautiful edification to the spirit. Wadawarantaza Atam Yash Yawam or Yash Lagalatawa. Lord's will, you have a good night. Washalam Lakam, which is peace to you all. Shalom, shalom.